Hello, everyone. Welcome to the virtual mini Super Saturday of the Utah Valley chapter of the American Guild of Organists. My name is Jay Goodliffe, and I will teach a workshop today on 5 tips for effective organ practice. So let's first talk about, when we talk about organ practice, things we already know about practicing. The first thing that we know is that playing through is not practicing, but it will make what we play permanent. Another way of putting this is that practice does not make perfect. Instead, practice makes permanent. Second thing we already know through experience is in a performance, you will play like you practiced, only worse. Those things that we were hoping would be okay, they'd work out when we performed, they did not work out. And we somehow managed to make mistakes that we had not even made while we practiced before. Things get worse when we perform. We know that to improve, we need to identify what we're doing wrong and stop doing those things. And we know to improve, we need to identify the things that we could do better and start doing those things instead. The difficulty is being able to identify those things, okay? So there are also things that we know about practicing and know that we should do as we practice. So these are standard techniques of practicing. The first one is that when you try to learn something, one of the best ways to learn it is to break it up into smaller parts and slow it down so you can play it without mistakes. Breaking it up might be breaking up into smaller units, such as practicing a few units at a time, or it might be practicing each hand alone, the feet alone, then bringing the hands together, one hand with the foot, and then finally bringing everything back together. We know this. We don't like to do it, but this is one of the ways that we learn pieces. We know that instead of spending our time playing the things we're doing well, which is what we enjoy doing, we need to spend time working on our weaknesses. That might mean for a specific piece of music to look at the spots that we're not performing well and spend time trying to make them better. Or it could be that we know there's specific things that we don't do well. We might not have a particular pedal technique that we need or finger substitution technique we don't have going very well. So we need to do some etudes or practice those specific things. We also know that when we make mistakes, we need to figure out ways to stop making those mistakes. But we don't always take the time to do that. We just play through another time and hope everything will get better. We know that we should practice all aspects of our performance. That includes getting on and off the bench, pulling pistons, changing registrations as we go, changing manuals. We should practice all aspects of our performance, but we often don't. We just practice the notes. We know that to get better really at anything, we should set goals, and then we should see how we do in those goals. These are all things that we know we should do, and we don't always do them. So in some sense, this could be tip number 0. Tip number 0 is to do the things we know we should be doing that we're not necessarily doing right now. Start doing those things and you're going to be better. All right, so now we can get to the official tips. Tip number 1 is to get feedback, okay? Remember, one of the things that we wanted to do, that we knew we needed to know how to do, is we need to know how to identify what we're doing wrong and what we can do to make it better. The best way to do that is to get feedback. We can try to get it from ourselves. That's difficult. It's a good idea to get it from others. Where can we get this feedback? Well, one of the best places to get feedback is to have a personal teacher. Your personal teacher, that is, you have a one-on-one lesson with a teacher that you meet with regularly every week or every 2 weeks. That teacher is going to give you personal instruction, is going to help you identify the things you're doing wrong, what you can do better, the skills you need to work on, the parts of the piece you need to work on so that you can do better the next time you bring the piece back. Having a teacher has lots of other advantages as well. That teacher, you'll find, will provide accountability for you. It'll make you practice better. It'll make you practice in the first place, and then it'll make you practice in a better way with more direction, because you're going to have to come back and play something for your teacher again. It actually provides a kind of performance, because when you play in front of your teacher, that's not the same as playing just for yourself. It's a kind of performance, so you get performance experience. And another thing that a personal teacher allows you to do is, or will teach you usually, is how to teach yourself. How can you help yourself improve? So we'll teach you to be a better teacher of yourself by observing how that teacher teaches you. And also your teacher will usually give you feedback, give you ideas on how you can learn things better on your own. So why don't we all get teachers, right? That would be great. I can certainly tell you the times that I have progressed the most are when I had a personal teacher that I was meeting with on a regular basis. That is when I made the most progress. That is when I increased my skills the most quickly. Okay? But the problem is that it takes time because you're going to feel accountable. You're going to need to practice more. It takes money. So not all of us have that much time, extra time to practice or money to spend on a teacher, although I think it is money well used. And if you would like a teacher, the Utah Valley AGO has lists of teachers on their website and other people that you can work with. So what can you do to get feedback if you don't have a personal teacher? So one of the ways you can do this is you can work with other people. You could find someone, a partner that you could work with who also plays the organ, and that you can have an agreement to listen to each other play and give feedback to each other. You can do this as a group, you can do this one-on-one. It's a good idea to have someone that's of, say, similar skills to you, even if someone you think is, usually we have different strengths and weaknesses. So even if someone's of a similar skill, or you might think not as skillful as you, they usually can do some things better than you. And so it's good, you can still get feedback from someone else. And we're all pretty good at being critics. So even if we're not good ourselves, we can often give decent feedback. Okay, so you come up with a regular time to work on things. You'll see that this, doing this, they'll do pretty well in giving you the personal instruction of a personal teacher. They'll definitely give you the accountability. Again, that's one of the nice things about having something regular. It's sort of like exercising. You find out when you have an exercise buddy, you generally will exercise better and more regularly. It'll also give you another chance to practice your performance. So they'll give you a couple of advantages that you'll have from a personal teacher. Okay. What else can you do? If you don't have someone that you're working with on a regular basis, and in these COVID times, it might be difficult to find someone that would get together with you. Another thing that you could do instead is to do something, you could call this more informal for feedback. So suppose you are, most of us, I would guess, are regularly play or semi-regularly play in our church worship services. So one of the things that you can do is you can approach someone in the congregation to give you feedback. This would normally be another musician. The first person asked is another organist who's there. If it's not from an organist, maybe something closely related like a pianist, or if failing that, a musician of any other instrument, right? You could ask them to give you feedback. Say, on this Sunday, will you please listen to my hymns and give me some ideas on things that I could do better? So one of the things about this is when someone's not set aside as a teacher, or even someone as a practice partner where you get used to giving feedback, honest feedback to each other, they're probably going to be hesitant to give you any real feedback. They're going to give you a lot of positive feedback, or that's what usually happens. So what are some of the ways that you could get some constructive suggestions and allow people to be more honest with you to identify the things that you could do better? So here are some suggestions I have on this. First, instead of just saying, how well did you do? Ask how well you played on a scale of 1 to 10. What you'll find is no one's ever going to give you 1. And I've also found that no one gives you a 10. And that's where you have the opportunity. If someone gives you a 10, then you need to find somebody else because you didn't play at a 10. So what you do is after someone doesn't give, even if they give you a 9, then you ask, what could you do to get a 10? What kind of feedback would they give? And then that's where you find that you start getting people to be more open with you and honest and giving you the feedback that would be helpful for you, or you hope that it will be helpful. You might not agree with all the feedback that you hear, but it's often useful because now you hear how someone is listening to you play. You hear how they hear you rather than how you hear you. And that might not be quite the same as what you think. Okay? Remember, by the way, also that you may be asked to give feedback to people. So my general rule on this, especially say for church musicians, is to say 3 nice things about something that they're already doing. and then say one thing, not lots of things, one thing that they could work on to improve. It might be, it would be even better if you could give a breath at the end of each phrase so the congregation could breathe along with you, as an example. Or maybe you could take a little bit of time in between the verses so that people can get to the next verse and get a little bit of a pause. Those kinds of suggestions. And anyway, you never know how people are going to take that, but if you're asked, it's good to give kind, helpful feedback. Okay. So these are different ways of asking other people to give you feedback. Another way you could try to get feedback is from yourself. You could record yourself. This would be, say, in the church or at the organ by yourself. You record yourself. You know you'll be the only person listening to it at that point. And you, at least my experience has been, is that you'll be surprised at the other mistakes you hear. You will hear, of course, the mistakes you realized you made as you were recording yourself. But you'll be surprised to hear things that you didn't think you were doing, but that are actually there on the recording. It doesn't have to be an outstanding recording. You don't need like some super microphone to make this work. You can just use your phone. Your phone is going to give you enough for you to hear what's going on. So you'll be able to hear, the thing that I hear, for example, is I thought I was playing these with the same articulation, but it turns out I was slurring some things and separating other things. I thought I was playing them the same, but I wasn't. And by listening to myself, I was able to hear those mistakes. Again, we need to be able to identify what we're doing wrong and then fix it. Essentially, anytime you practice by yourself, you're having a lesson with yourself where you're your own teacher, and you need to try to figure out ways to take advantage of that. All right, so that's tip number one. That was a long tip. These next tips are going to go a little faster. So tip number two is to practice our performances. So I think we all realize that performing is difficult. I think we all realize that it's something that perhaps through experience, I know that I've had lots of experience messing up when I perform. I feel like when that happens to me, sometimes my initial impression is that I should give up and I don't ever want to try performing again. Then I try to remind myself that performing itself is a skill to be learned. There are actually no natural performers. What we have actually are experienced performers. So you need to figure out a way to gain more experience so you'll feel more comfortable in a performing situation. You're never going to, I don't think, are ever going to feel 100% comfortable, but there's probably some situations that you feel more comfortable performing than in other situations. Maybe you play in your worship service every week, and so now you feel more comfortable doing that. But then when you're called to perform in a recital, which you haven't done, say, for 6 months, then you feel very uncomfortable. That's the experience. That's how it's working. Okay. So we need to get that experience. So how do we get that kind of performance experience? So we can think through our own experiences, and if you're a teacher, the experiences of others. If you have been a student, or if you teach students, you have said yourself, I would guess, or you've heard your students say, I played this perfectly yesterday. And in the lesson, you're not playing it perfectly. So why is that? That's because when you play in front of somebody else, even if it's just one person, even if it's your practice partner, it's a performance, okay? And that makes it more difficult. Performances are they take more cognitive effort. You have to keep track, it seems like keep track of other things besides what you're doing with your hands and your feet, the music. It's difficult. My best renditions of any piece have always been the night before a performance. That's when I smile the most. That's when I think, what a beautiful piece that was. As musicians, we have the opportunity, and I'll say the responsibility, to share that joy with others. That's the parable of the talents. That's why we perform. So we need to figure out the way we can perform it almost as well as we play it for ourselves so that others can feel that joy. That's why we perform. So we have several ideas from tip number one about creating performing experiences. That is, play for a teacher, play for a partner, play for, tell somebody that you want them to evaluate you. That's going to make it more of a performance than not. Okay? So playing for others. But what's another way that we can get performing experiences? So think about some of the experiences you've had where you feel like it's more performance-like than not. So I'll give an example besides going to a lesson. Oh, excuse me, let's bring this back. So have you ever been playing in a chapel and you're playing by yourself, it's practice time, and somebody enters the chapel, some random person wanders around the back and then just walks back out? How did it change how you felt while you were playing? Or did it change how you were playing? Did you feel something different, like you somehow needed to perform better? Maybe that's just me. I've sometimes had that experience. So how can we harness that to practice performing that kind of feel? So one of the ways I'm going to say is that you can record yourself and post it. Okay, you don't have to post it publicly, but you're going to post it for someone else to watch. So you may be aware that the chapter, the Utah Valley chapter, has been uploading recorded performances for virtual recitals because we haven't been having in-person recitals. You can go find those on the uvago.org website. You can see those performances, and they're great. They're great experiences, and I know from experience in trying to record something and thinking I'm going to post it, it's a different feeling. When I know that I'm playing something that other people are going to see when I'm recording it, it becomes a step towards performance. It's not quite a full step because I realize as I perform that if I don't like it, I can turn it off or delete it and get rid of it. But I still know that someone is going to watch it, and I can still feel the performance ideas when the feeling of a performance, at least it's a half step there towards that performance when you know you're going to be posting it. Okay. When you post it, it'll make it at least somewhat seem like a performance. I've had the experience, and maybe you've had the experience of something that's a little bit more performance-like in my church, in my ward worship services. We're currently not singing, and maybe some of you have had that experience as well. That means when you play the organ, it becomes more performance-like because nobody is singing over you. They are going to hear you, and they're going to hear anything that you do right or wrong. It's the closest thing to me for that is playing for a funeral when people are the procession in or the recession out, because the only thing that's going on is the organ, and they're just listening to you, and so you get a little bit of a performance experience from that. But not only is our ward doing that, our ward broadcasts that what's going on in that meeting to the rest of the ward, and it's on YouTube live, and then it's posted there for a week. And so when I play about once a month for our congregation, and after I play and after I psych myself up that I can listen to it, I go listen to see how I did on that posted those hymns that I played. I see how I did, or if I did a musical number, I go listen to see how I played in that musical number. And that's where you get to teach yourself again. You can find out what are the mistakes that I made and why did I make those mistakes. And so that's going back to number one, getting feedback, right? And see if I can figure out a way to fix those mistakes in the future so I can avoid them. What do I have to work on? But then also knowing that all these things are going to be there and posted, it's a much more performance-like experience. It's closer to a recital experience in many ways than playing in church when people are singing. So those are our two top tips so far, is to get feedback from people and to figure out a way to practice your performances. All right, so tip number 3 is, although I've been giving you a whole bunch of ways to make things more difficult so far, getting a teacher is making your life more difficult. It's giving you more of a challenge. Practicing performances is making your life more difficult. It's practicing performances, okay? Here's a way to make it easier for yourself, and that is to be nice to yourself. So perhaps you've seen in, say, general conference or music in the spoken word, when the tabernacle organists are playing, have you ever looked at their music that they have on the stand there? It's all marked up. They have fingerings written in, they have arrows pointed here, they've got fluorescent circles on their music, on the score there. And I'm guessing that they mark changes in the manuals, or that they're changes in registration. I'm guessing that's what those are. So if they're doing it, you should do it. Why are you trying to be a hero and play without marking anything up? You should be marking everything up. So be nice to yourself. So you should write in the fingerings and the pedal markings. When you are practicing the piece, if you make the same mistake twice, you should write something in to help you avoid it. You should go back and make sure, try to figure out a way. So besides doing the things that we already know, which are breaking it up, slowing it down. Maybe you're gonna have to practice hands alone on that part. You're gonna have to slow it down and speed it back up. You do those things, but you write something in. You make some sort of marking that helps you remember to overcome that in the future. Okay? So you should be nice to yourself right now, nice to your current self. You should also be nice to your future self. What do I mean by your future self? Well, most of the time, most of the things that we play, we're going to play again. It could be a recital piece. At some point, we're going to play that recital piece again. Probably. If you don't, then you should, because you're not being efficient. You need to use those kinds of things in multiple venues so that it's worthwhile. Most of the hymns that you play out of the hymn book, at some point, you're going to play those hymns again. So you should mark everything up. You should write in the registrations that you're using. So the reason you write them in doesn't necessarily mean you're going to follow them exactly. If the sacrament hymns in a Mormon congregation, there's only so many. You rotate through those, and so you might just mark what you did, so you wouldn't do exactly the same thing the next time. But it's a place to start. And you save time the next time you come back to it. If you're playing, this could be for hymns or for a piece that you're playing. I like to write in the top the places that are going to require attention if I go through and play this again. That is, if I perform it again, or if I'm going to be playing it for a meeting in the church. I like to write down, look at measures 18 through 22. You're going to have to work on those hands alone again and bring them back up to speed. And I might have other markings to myself that says, you're going to need to run through this 2 times completely before you just put it down and play through it, even as a prelude. That you're going to need, this is how many times it's going to take for you to be able to learn, to be able to play it in a place that you're willing to play it in public. There are some pieces, right, that some preludes that we have that might be a little easier. You hardly have to run through them many times. Other times you might find something very difficult. You're going to have to run through it many times. Right, so that's some tips that we have for making it easy. So far, remember, we have get feedback. The second thing that we had was to figure out a way to practice your performances. Our third tip is to make it easy. Tip number 4, I'm sure you've heard this tip before, is to use a metronome. I'm surprised for the people that I teach, the students who don't use a metronome. I'm surprised to see people who would really help to get kind of not everyone has an innate sense of rhythm, maybe none of us do, but having a metronome will help teach you that rhythm. So what a metronome does for you, especially as you're learning a piece, it keeps you honest and it prevents bad tendencies. So one of the tendencies that we have, I guess as lots of people have, is to play fast in the easy spots and play slow in the hard spots. And we already talked, one of the things that we know is that practice makes permanent. If you keep playing it through the same way over and over again, you're going to perform it that way. So when you you will end up doing the same thing and you perform, playing faster in the easy spots and slower in the hard spots. Okay. Another thing that I at least have a tendency to do is to, when there's a difficult spot, is to rush through it. As an example, in an organ piece, you'll find that all the crazy trills or whatever the turns end up as they go to the climax of the piece where everything's coming together, all the different voices are coming together. And then we end at the climax of the piece, and that was the hardest spot. And my tendency is to rush through that rather than actually slowing it down. You might wonder, how is it possible to do both those things? That is, how are we going slow in the hard spots and rushing into the hard spots? Well, I don't do them at the same time, but I somehow manage to do both in the same piece. Maybe you don't do that. Okay. So use a metronome to prevent those kinds of bad tendencies. Another good thing to do is that for metronome is to help you make progress and to make steady progress. So you know that when you break something up and you slow it down, you're trying, that's a standard practice technique. then you start speeding it back up. And one of the tendencies I have is to try to speed it up more quickly. So if you just go through, say, one click at a time on a metronome, 60 to 63, 63 to 66, 69, and so on, then you're going to speed it up at a manageable pace so that you will learn the piece, and it'll help you. You'll be able to keep control of the piece, and it'll get better, and you'll get better at a steady pace. All right. When I do things, I like, as I'm getting closer to performance, I like to perform it once with the metronome and then once without, and then eventually take away the metronome altogether, where I sit down at the organ. That is, I actually take a step away from the organ, sit back down at the organ, and play it without the metronome. But I practice a lot with the metronome. If you look at some of my music, besides having all the markups of the music, I will have on the side, here's how fast I went through this piece last time. And here's how, and so I have it marked as hands together at 66, hands alone at 96, or something like that. And then I know what I need to work, how fast I need to go in the next time. And you'll see me starting at 66 and ending up at 44, something like that. Depends on the piece. Okay. All right. So and you can, a metronome you can put on your phone. So I usually use the Pro metronome, but you can use any metronome. That works for me. All right, last tip, distribute your practice. So what I mean by this, so this is something you can think about for studying for an exam. Cramming, you can cram, but it's ineffective. What you need to do, just like you should spread out your studying for an exam, for learning anything, you should spread out your practicing. Now, one of the difficulties that we've had this year, is being able to get to the church. There was a time where I couldn't get into a church to practice. So what do? And it was actually through that experience where I got to relearn some of the things that can help me practice off the organ bench. Okay? So say for hymns, you can study the text and figure out where you should put in breathing spaces when you play. When you can study, if it's a regular organ piece, you can study the music and figure out how are you going to approach this? Where are the natural divisions of the piece? You can practice the manual parts on the piano and write in the fingering. I did this when I didn't have a chance to go play, except for a while, my ward didn't allow anyone into the building except for Sunday. And so I had to practice on the piano. That was my only option. And it was great in some ways because I increased my finger strength by practicing on the piano. And I would just write in the pedal marks, even though I wasn't there on the organ, because eventually you can figure that out. You can also listen to other people play the pieces that you're doing. This might be hymns that you hear. It might be a piece that you're learning. These days on YouTube, you can find almost every piece and hear other people play it. And then you can listen to it and see what they like and adopt what they're doing that you like and avoid the things that you don't like what other people are doing. So I was very fortunate that I got to hear in my old ward, Walter Whipple, who was in the adjacent ward. He's a great organist, and I used to just listen to him play prelude and hymns. And so when we get back to a place where we're overlapping wards again, listen to the other organists play and see how they do it. Now, for serious people, I mean, that is, if you're thinking about becoming a professional or something, distributing the practice means that you don't play 4 hours in a row. It means that you take breaks in between. For normal people like us who aren't trying to become professionals, it means you don't try to practice 2 hours the night before. It means you try to practice 30 minutes a day for 4 days, and you're going to be better off. All right. So what I want you to think about is what you're going to change in your practice routine. So think about your current practice routine. What are you going to do to get feedback? What are you going to do to increase the performances that you practice? What are you going to do to make it easier on yourself? How are you going to use a metronome in your practice? And how are you going to change the times that you practice to distribute it across? You may not take all of these different tips. As a matter of fact, I encourage you not to do everything at once. Take one of them and figure out what's one way that you can improve your practicing for next time. And I hope that by so doing, you will feel the joy of learning the organ, playing the organ, and being able to share that joy of playing through performances with others. Thank you.